The moment before everything changes is always quieter than you'd expect. No dramatic music, no warning signs, just the ordinary hum of everyday life, right before it splits into before and after. For one girl sitting alone in a crowded cafeteria, that moment was about to arrive, carried on the laughter of boys who'd mistaken her silence for surrender. The cafeteria hummed with its familiar chaos. Voices overlapped in a symphony of teenage energy, shouts across tables, bursts of laughter, the metallic clang of trays sliding along rails, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum floors, still damp from the morning's mopping. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar institutional glow that made even fresh food look slightly unappetizing. The smell of reheated pizza mixed with the tang of disinfectant, creating an odor that every student had long stopped noticing. Through the double doors, students poured in like a tide, some moving in tight clusters of friendship, others drifting alone through the currents. Among them was Sophia, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd mastered the art of not being seen. She held her tray close to her body, her steps measured and quiet, eyes tracking the floor more than the faces around her. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, occasionally obscuring her face when she tilted her head down, which was often. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, sliding down slightly whenever she looked down, which she did constantly, as if the tiles beneath her feet held secrets the world above refused to share. She'd always been this way, or at least for as long as anyone at school could remember. The quiet girl, the one who never raised her hand in class unless directly called upon, whose voice was so soft that teachers often asked her to repeat herself. The one who walked the hallways, hugging her books to her chest like armor, who disappeared into the library during free periods, who ate lunch in corners where shadows pooled deepest. Being invisible had its advantages. Nobody expected anything from you. Nobody asked you to parties you didn't want to attend anyway. Nobody pried into your life or demanded explanations for why you preferred solitude to social warfare. But invisibility also came with a price. It marked you as prey to those who fed on weakness, real or perceived. Sophia navigated through the maze of tables toward her usual spot, far from the center where the popular kids held court. Far from the windows where the athletic crowd congregated, far from the doors where troublemakers lounged. Her corner was at the back, near the emergency exit that nobody used, where a structural pillar created a small alcove that felt almost private. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She set her tray down with care, arranged her napkin, positioned her water bottle just so. These small rituals gave her a sense of control in a place where control was an illusion. The sandwich she'd packed that morning sat wrapped in wax paper, whole grain bread, turkey, lettuce, tomato, nothing remarkable, but made with the care her father always insisted upon. Fuel for your body, fuel for your mind, he'd say, though his lessons had always been about so much more than nutrition. Sophia unwrapped her sandwich slowly, her fingers working at the paper with an almost meditative precision. This was her time, these 37 minutes of lunch period where she could exist in her own small bubble of peace before returning to the performance of navigating classrooms, hallways, and the exhausting work of remaining unnoticed. But peace, she'd learned, was always temporary. Across the cafeteria, at a table near the center where sunlight streamed through high windows, 3 boys sat surveying their domain. Brandon, Kyle, and Ryan, names that had become synonymous with disruption, with the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers inflicted on each other and called entertainment. They weren't the worst kids in school, not by far. They didn't deal drugs or start serious fights or vandalize property, but they possessed something perhaps more insidious, a keen sense for vulnerability and an unshakable belief that other people's discomfort was their right to entertainment. Brandon led their trio, not through any official designation, but through the sheer force of his personality. Tall, athletic, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. He moved through school as though it existed for his amusement. His smile was quick and sharp, the kind that never quite reached his eyes, and he had a talent for finding the exact words that would burrow under someone's skin and stay there. Kyle was the amplifier, turning Brandon's whispers into shouts, his mockery into performance. Loud, brash, with a laugh that could fill a room and make everyone in it uncomfortable, he fed off attention the way plants fed off sunlight. Where Brandon was calculated, Kyle was chaos, throwing verbal grenades just to watch them explode. Ryan completed the triangle, quieter than the other two, but complicit all the same. He laughed at their jokes, joined their campaigns, participated in their casual cruelty, not out of genuine malice, but out of something perhaps more common: fear. Fear that if he didn't join in, he'd become the target instead. So he followed, he participated, he buried whatever conscience might have objected beneath the need to belong to something, even if that something wasn't particularly worth belonging to. This afternoon, their attention had landed on Sophia. "There's that girl again," Brandon said, his voice carrying that particular tone of performative observation pitched just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "What's her name?" "Sophie." "Zara, the one who acts like she's allergic to talking." Kyle snorted, turning to look. "Sophia, I think." "Yeah, the ghost girl. Sits there every day like she's invisible or something. It's weird, right? Like, who doesn't even try to sit with people?" Ryan nodded, glancing over. "Maybe she thinks she's better than everyone else. You know, too smart for the rest of us peasants." It was the kind of conversation that happened dozens of times a day in schools everywhere. Casual, thoughtless cruelty disguised as observation, teenagers asserting their place in the hierarchy by pushing others down. Most of the time, these comments dissolved into the air, forgotten as quickly as they were spoken. But sometimes, they gained momentum. Brandon stood, and that simple action changed the energy in the cafeteria. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Some students looked away quickly, grateful not to be the target. Others watched with the queasy fascination of spectators at a gladiatorial arena, knowing they should intervene, but paralyzed by their own self-preservation. "Let's go say hi," Brandon said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Be friendly." Kyle and Ryan exchanged a glance. Kyle's eyes bright with anticipation, Ryan's shadowed with something that might have been reluctance, but not enough to stop him from standing up. Together, they wove between tables toward the back corner where Sophia sat, their approach tracked by dozens of eyes. Sophia felt them coming before she saw them. It was something she'd developed over months of being a target, a sixth sense for approaching danger, a tightening in her chest that signaled when the walls of her invisible fortress were about to be breached. Her hand froze mid-motion, sandwiched halfway to her mouth, and she felt her heartbeat accelerate, that familiar rush of adrenaline that came with fight-or-flight response. But she didn't run. She'd never run. Running only made it worse, gave them more ammunition, more reason to pursue. So she sat perfectly still, her breathing deliberately slow and controlled, activating the techniques her father had taught her for managing fear and stress. Ground yourself, find your center, don't react from emotion. The words echoed in her mind, a mantra she'd repeated countless times. The three boys arrived at her table like a storm front. Brandon leaned against the table's edge, his shadow falling across her tray, blocking the light. Kyle positioned himself at her side, too close, invading the personal space she'd carefully constructed. Ryan hung back slightly, arms crossed, the lookout. "Hey there," Brandon said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Eating alone again? That's got to be lonely, right? Or do you actually prefer having no friends?" Sophia didn't look up. She set her sandwich down carefully, her hands steady despite the tremor she felt running through her core. She knew the script of these encounters by heart. They would poke and prod, looking for a reaction. If she gave them nothing, sometimes they'd get bored and leave. Sometimes. "I'm talking to you," Brandon continued, his voice hardening. "It's rude to ignore people, you know. Or did your parents forget to teach you manners?" Kyle laughed, that harsh bark of sound that made people flinch. "Maybe she's deaf. Or maybe she really does think she's too good for us." "What is it, Sophia? You think you're special. You think sitting alone makes you interesting." Still, Sophia remained silent, but inside something was shifting. She could feel it like tectonic plates grinding against each other, pressure building. The careful control she'd maintained starting to crack. She'd endured weeks of this, snide comments in hallways, accidental shoves near lockers, mocking laughter following her between classes. She'd absorbed it all, let it roll off her like water off stone, because her father had taught her that true strength meant controlling yourself, not controlling others. But even stone could erode. Even silence had its breaking point. Ryan reached forward and flicked her water bottle, sending it spinning across the table. "Come on, say something, anything, or are you actually mute?" Kyle, emboldened by the attention they were drawing, grabbed her sandwich. He held it up like a trophy, examining it with exaggerated disgust. "Whole wheat bread? Seriously? No wonder you're so boring. This is the most depressing sandwich I've ever seen." He dropped it back onto her tray, deliberately crushing it, smearing mustard across the paper. Laughter rippled through nearby tables. Not everyone was laughing. Some students looked uncomfortable, guilty even, but enough were. Enough that the boys felt validated, encouraged, powerful, and that's when Sophia made her decision. She stood up slowly, the movement so controlled and deliberate that it seemed to happen in slow motion. Her chair scraped backward with a sound that cut through the laughter like a knife. The cafeteria didn't go silent, not yet, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, a collective holding of breath, as if everyone sensed that something was about to change. Sophia adjusted her glasses with one hand, pushing them up her nose with her index finger, and then she did something she almost never did. She looked directly at Brandon, met his eyes with a gaze that was calm, clear, and utterly unflinching. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried with it a quality that made people lean in to hear. "You think I'm scared of you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty that Brandon actually hesitated for a moment. Then his bravado kicked back in, and he laughed. "Oh, she speaks. What are you going to do about it, ghost girl? Going to report us to a teacher? Going to cry?" "I'm going to give you one chance," Sophia said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with something that made Ryan take an involuntary step backward. "Walk away. Right now, and we can all pretend this didn't happen." Kyle howled with laughter. "Or what? You'll beat us up? You?" He turned to the watching students, playing to his audience. "Did you hear that? She's going to—" Brandon reached forward to shove Sophia's shoulder, a gesture meant to humiliate, to put her back in her place, to reassert the natural order of things. His hand moved through the air with casual confidence, never expecting resistance. It never made contact. What happened next would be replayed in the minds of witnesses for months afterward, analyzed and exaggerated and debated, but in the moment, it was simply a blur of motion too fast to fully comprehend. Sophia moved. Years of training, thousands of hours of practice in a dojo that smelled of sweat and discipline, countless repetitions of forms and techniques until they'd become as natural as breathing, all of it activated in a single fluid motion. She didn't think about it. Thinking was too slow. Her body simply knew what to do. Brandon's outstretched arm was redirected with a gentle but firm brush of her hand. His momentum turned against him. She stepped to the side, her feet positioning themselves in the precise stance her father had drilled into her since she was 6 years old. and with a rotation of her hips and a pull on Brandon's extended arm, she used his own force to send him tumbling. He hit the floor hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs in a surprised gasp, his back meeting linoleum with a meaty thud that echoed through the suddenly silent cafeteria. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Brandon lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. Kyle's mouth hung open, his laugh dying half-formed. Ryan had gone pale, his arms dropping to his sides. Then Kyle, operating on instinct and pride and anger at seeing his friend humiliated, lunged forward with a shout. He was bigger than Sophia, stronger, moving with the full force of his athletic frame. He should have been able to overpower her easily. Should have. Sophia sidestepped his charge with minimal movement, just enough to let him pass by her, and as he stumbled forward off balance from meeting no resistance, she hooked her foot behind his ankle and gave him the gentlest of pushes at his shoulder. Kyle's own momentum did the rest. He went down hard, face first, his tray of leftover lunch exploding across the floor in a spray of food and plastic. Mashed potatoes painted the tiles, peas scattered like marbles. His nose hit the ground with enough force to bring tears to his eyes, though nothing was broken. Sophia had controlled even that, ensuring she defended herself without causing real injury. 2 down in less than 5 seconds. Ryan's survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his pride, that dangerous, stupid pride that had made him follow Brandon and Kyle in the first place, forced him forward. He raised his hands in fists, assuming some half-remembered fighting stance from movies he'd watched, and threw a wild punch at Sophia's head. She didn't even need to block it. She simply wasn't there when his fist arrived, having shifted her weight and position with such minimal movement that Ryan punched air. Before he could recover, Sophia had caught his extended arm at the wrist, applied pressure at a specific point that made his hand open involuntarily, and swept his legs out from under him with a precision that would have made her instructors proud. Ryan hit the ground on his back, the impact stunning him into stillness, staring up at the fluorescent lights, while his brain tried to understand how he'd ended up horizontal. 3 boys, 3 seconds, 3 bodies on the cafeteria floor. Sophia stood exactly where she'd been, her breathing barely elevated, her posture relaxed, her glasses slightly askew from the motion. She adjusted them again with that same precise gesture, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and looked down at the 3 boys with an expression that held no anger, no triumph, no gloating, just a calm, almost sad acknowledgement of what had been necessary. The cafeteria had fallen into the kind of silence that felt physical, that pressed against eardrums and made people acutely aware of their own heartbeats. Every student who had been laughing moments before now sat frozen, their smiles dead on their faces. Every person who'd looked away now stared openly, shock written across their features. Even the cafeteria workers had stopped mid-task, spatulas hanging in mid-air, their eyes wide. Sophia bent down calmly and picked up her tray. The sandwich was ruined, crushed and smeared, but she folded the wax paper around it anyway, her movements methodical. She collected her water bottle, checked that nothing had spilled, and then, with the same careful precision she'd used to unwrap her lunch, she sat back down. She took a sip of water, set the bottle down, and pulled out an apple from her bag. Her backup food, always prepared. She polished it on her sleeve, the soft friction of fabric against fruit skin the loudest sound in the room, and took a bite. The crunch seemed deafening. Only then did the boys begin to move. Brandon pushed himself up first, his face flushed crimson, not from exertion but from humiliation. Kyle rolled onto his side, wiping at his nose, checking for blood. Ryan sat up slowly, cradling his wrist even though it wasn't injured, just sore from the control hold Sophia had applied. They looked at each other, then at the dozens of eyes watching them, then at Sophia, who sat eating her apple as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Brandon opened his mouth, perhaps to threaten, perhaps to save face with some verbal attack, but the words died unspoken. What could he say? What threat could he make that wouldn't sound hollow after being so thoroughly, efficiently, humiliatingly defeated? The three boys retreated. Not running, not quite, but moving quickly, heads down, desperate to escape the weight of all those stairs. They pushed through the cafeteria doors and disappeared, leaving behind only scattered food and shattered egos. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, like water beginning to flow after an ice dam breaks, whispers started. Quiet at first, then growing, spreading through the cafeteria in ripples. Did you see that? How did she? Who even is she? That was insane. Those guys got destroyed. I didn't know she could. Sophia ignored it all. She finished her apple, core and all, and pulled out a small container of carrot sticks. She ate them one by one, her eyes on the wall, her expression serene. Inside, her heart was still racing, adrenaline still flooding her system, but she'd learned to control her external presentation. Never show them your fear, never show them your anger. Control what you can control, yourself. She thought about her father, about the years of training that had led to this moment. He'd been a martial artist before an injury had ended his competitive career, and he'd poured all his knowledge, all his philosophy into teaching his daughter. Not to fight, he'd always emphasized, but to defend. Not to hurt, but to protect. Not to seek conflict, but to be ready when conflict found you. You'll be tested, he'd told her once, his hands gentle as he corrected her stance. People will mistake your kindness for weakness, your silence for fear. When that happens, you must decide who you are. Are you the person they think you see, or are you the person you know yourself to be? Today, she'd answered that question. As lunch period wound toward its end, students began to move again, conversations resuming, though many kept glancing her way. Some looked at her with awe, others with respect, a few with fear. Sophia noticed it all, but allowed it to wash over her without attachment. She hadn't done this for their admiration or respect. She'd done it because it was necessary, because the line had been crossed, because silence in the face of escalating aggression wasn't peace. It was surrender. When the bell rang, she stood, collected her belongings, and walked toward the door. Students parted for her automatically, creating a path where before she would have had to navigate around them. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't let it change her stride or posture, but as she passed the emergency exit near where she'd been sitting, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not of triumph, not of satisfaction, but of recognition. She'd been tested, she'd answered. And while she knew this wasn't the end, rumors would spread, conversations would happen, perhaps there would be consequences or new complications. She also knew something fundamental had shifted. The quiet girl in the corner had shown that silence could be a choice, not a weakness. That invisibility could be a strategy, not a fate. That sometimes the people you underestimated held strength you couldn't imagine until it was too late. As Sophia walked into the hallway, blending back into the flow of students heading to their next classes, she carried with her the knowledge that she'd stood her ground. Not with anger or aggression, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of and hoped she'd never have to prove it again. But if she did, she would be ready. The afternoon sun streamed through windows, painting everything in gold, and Sophia walked through the light with her head held perhaps just a little higher than before, her steps just a fraction more confident, her presence no longer invisible but transformed into something else entirely, someone who'd been there all along, just waiting for the moment when quiet strength would speak louder than any words ever could.